Hi, my name is Nika, and I'm really excited to talk to you about my career and what I do. So, I'm a medical illustrator and I live in New York City. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I am currently a medical illustrator for the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. So, I'm going to be showing you some of my work and just going to discuss how I got into this career. So, as a medical illustrator, I use art to explain complicated topics in science and medicine. I create illustrations, animations, 3D models to educate different kinds of audiences on medical or science topics. I usually work directly with doctors and science researchers and medical school faculty. Most of the work that I do is for journal publications, textbooks, and presentations. And I also work within the medical school, creating learning content for lecture slides for medical students to learn from. So a day in the life of my job includes meeting with clients to discuss their needs for the illustrations and going through a process of creating sketches, revising those sketches, and then finalizing the illustration in color. As you can see on the left-hand side, I'm using a Cintiq tablet with Photoshop, and that's normally how I create my illustrations. On the right-hand side, I created this illustration about COVID and how it enters the lungs and the cells that it affects, and that was done in Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator. I usually work on multiple illustrations at a time, and sometimes I collaborate with my team members to create learning modules that are used in the medical school. And usually when we do that, I'm the person that will work on the visuals or the illustrations that go within the learning module. So I really like my job because I work across all departments of medicine. Since I work for medical school, that's within a hospital, I get a really large variety of projects from clients in different sectors of the hospital and the medical school. So for example, on the left-hand side, these are some illustrations I did for a book, a textbook, and this was published last year, and it's about shoulder and neck anatomy. And on the right-hand side, I did this illustration to show the electrode placement for the treatment of epilepsy. So this is a surgical illustration. And when they do this procedure, there are certain electrodes that they place on a specific area of the brain. And so that's what this illustration is showing. I also do 3D work as well, which is super exciting. I created this illustration on the left-hand side of the anatomy of the ear. So this is for medical students to learn about the form and the function of the inner ear. And this model is hosted on a website called Sketchfab, which is a 3D platform that allows you to look at models and rotate them around in space. So the students use this model to study from for their exams and quizzes. On the right-hand side, I created this 2D animation of hair cell transduction. So hair cell transduction is the process of converting a sound into electrical signal that your brain can interpret. So these two visuals actually kind of go together in a way. So if you look at the model of the inner ear, on this far left-hand side here is your eardrum. When you hear a sound, this vibrates, and its vibration sends all the way through these bones to the cochlea, which is the spiral part right here. Inside of the cochlea, where this purple spiral is, you have teeny tiny little hair cells, like microscopic hair cells, believe it or not. And that vibration from the sound that you hear makes these hair cells actually move. And when they move, then you have this process here called hair cell transduction, where that sound is then converted into electrical potential that sends down to neuron. This is a branch of a neuron here. And once that signal travels down the neuron, your brain is able to interpret it. So this nerve here is where that signal will travel up to your brain, and that's how you interpret the sound. So this is one of the things I love about my job is I'm learning about different physiological processes within the body, and it's super interesting. Just the human body is so amazing. And so with medical illustration, I get to visualize those concepts. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about like more of my personal story into this career. Um, Like I mentioned before, I really like this because I'm just learning like cutting edge technology and procedures in the medical field every day. So it's very exciting. That's one of the reasons why I chose this field. And also, another thing is that I do think that there is a lot of underrepresentation within STEM and especially within medical illustration, since this is a really small field. There's not a lot of diversity in medical illustration. So only 1% of medical illustrators are Black. And because there's not enough representation in the field itself, there's not enough representation in the actual healthcare materials that we see. A lot of medical illustrations and textbooks of just a standard white body, and there's not a lot of diversity in that. So one of the things that I try to do is make sure that the work that I create represents the multicultural world that we live in. And so this illustration on the left-hand side is a cover illustration that I did for a book on head and neck disorders. So it's something I'm very conscious about when I create work, is to just make sure that I'm creating work that's representative of the world that we live in, which is very diverse. Okay, and lastly, I'm going to talk about the work that I did at school and how I prepared myself to enter this career. So I actually have a background in fine art. I went to Georgia Southern University where I studied art. And during my time there, I realized that I really wanted to specialize in something with my art, but I didn't really want to teach. I wasn't quite sure how to do that though. But I always had this love and interest for biology and anatomy and science. But being an art major, I wasn't sure how I could really take those classes and incorporate that with my degree. So one of my instructors during my junior year of college and undergrad told me about medical illustration when I was finishing up my degree in art. And when I researched it, I realized that was exactly what I wanted to do, because it was a way to combine my love for art and this interest that I had always had in science. So after I graduated with my art degree, I took some time off and I fulfilled the prerequisites that were required to get into graduate school for medical illustration. So they required you to have art classes and also science courses. So I took about 3 or 4 science course requirements as a post-bac student in order to apply for graduate school for medical illustration. And after I did that, I applied and I went to the University of Illinois at Chicago, which is one of the 4 accredited schools in North America that offers a master's degree in medical illustration. I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for the education that I received. And the classes that I took in art school, like figure drawing and still lives, really helped me a lot on how to accurately show light on form and to accurately show the human body. And then in grad school, I learned how to digitally paint and use 3D modeling softwares and things like that. Lots of medical illustrators use new technology to create visuals and animations. So the schooling and the training was very important for me to do well in this career. So currently in my job now, some of the skills that are really important for me to have are research skills. I have to research the surgeries and the procedures and the anatomy that I show to make sure I'm showing it accurately. Visual storytelling is also really important. And being able to understand design principles and color compositions is also essential as well. Also, being knowledgeable about science and science concepts helps me to be able to have conversations with physicians and speak their language. So both of these illustrations that I'm showing right here, I did while I was in graduate school. The one on the left, I actually used a 3D modeling program called 3ds Max, which is why it looks like 3D looking. I use that in combination with Photoshop to create this illustration about a certain protein that's on the cell membrane layer called a P glycoprotein. And then on the right-hand side, I did this illustration in Photoshop. And this was for the WIC clinics in Chicago, which stands for Women, Infants, and Children. It's a clinic to help new moms. And this illustration was to help educate them about the importance of breastfeeding for their babies. And so if you guys are interested in this career or you want to reach out and you have some questions for me, please feel free to visit my website. That's www.nikaford.com. You can send me an email through the website, and you can also view more of my work on there as well. So hope you enjoyed this presentation.